Welcome to The Truth Always Reigns. Oh, sorry. Let me redo that. I was going to say something else. Welcome to TIR News USA, where truth always reigns. Uh, God bless America. I blanked. Okay, let me try that one more time. Welcome to TAR News USA, where truth always reigns. Welcome to our very first podcast, and today we're going to be talking about how we take symbols and imagery and make them our own. Now, we're coming at you with three hosts today. We're all coming from varying backgrounds of social media. Jen, so how about we introduce ourselves?
All right. Well, I am Darth Brandybuck. You may have seen me on TikTok or YouTube. I started out making jokes about pop culture, and then I ended up talking about politics and conspiracy theories. And I really enjoy exploring both and talking about both and making jokes about both. And I'm excited to share it with everybody else.
Keyword there is jokes. Nothing that we say here should be taken seriously for legal purposes. My name is Political Memester. You probably found me on TikTok or Instagram, and I can't wait to get this thing started.
And then my name is the Tac Racc. I've been on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube now for about a year, growing a little bit of a following on there. I took a bit of a break, but we're back. We actually came back a couple weeks ago, and we decided to start this whole harebrained scheme, and here we are. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about basically reappropriation of symbols, imagery. It's something that's been done a lot throughout American history. And as kind of, we're kind of libertarians, we're Republicans, we're kind of a mixed bag of people, but a lot of those images have been taken by us and made our own, that we're meant to kind of make fun of, or at least make light of who we are. So without further ado, let's talk about that. What have we done to make those things our own?
I think the most obvious example would be the song Yankee Doodle from the American Revolution. Everyone just kind of knows it nowadays as one of the most quintessential American folk tunes, but there's actually a lot of history behind it, even before the Revolution. I didn't do as much research into it as y'all did, but maybe you guys would share a little bit more, but that's just the first example that comes to mind.
Yeah, so Yankee Doodle Dandy was a pre-revolutionary song that was actually sung by British officers to mock the disorganized colonial soldiers and call them Yankees during the French and Indian War.
Where does the term Yankee even come from?
I did not look that far. I looked up doodle, macaroni, and dandy. So
Uh,
doodle was actually came from a 17th century slang term to mean fool. Macaroni was a popular wig style in the 1770s, and dandy was a 1770s slang for someone who was impersonating nobility. So put them all together, a Yankee Doodle dandy was somebody who was an unsophisticated person who believed that simply sticking a feather in their hat would transform them into nobility.
huh.
If I may, gents, I looked it up a little bit. It looks like Yankee originates from the French and Indian War, and it was kind of used to describe the disheveled colonial Yankees who fought with the British Army. It was first written at Fort Pralio around 1755. So,
Huh.
kind of us ruffian Americans, if you will.
Yeah.
And then the term was later specifically used for Northerners,
Mm-hmm.
especially during like the
Yeah.
Civil War.
Hmm.
But by 1781, the song was popular by American troops who later added verses that would mock the British and hailed George Washington as the commander of like the colonial army. And by 1781, it had turned from like an insult to a song of national pride.
We used to sing this
Hmm.
song in school when I was in like second or third grade. We would sing parts of the song. I obviously don't know all the verses, but I remember something about Captain Washington and hasty pudding or something.
I think you're mixing Yankee Doodle Dandy with a Christmas song with the hasting pudding part.
Maybe. No, that's piggy pudding, isn't it?
It's figgy
I
pudding.
can't say.
Figgy pudding. It's figgy.
Yeah, Figgy.
Did you not
I
memorize
don't know.
the entire lyrics of all of Yankee Doodle?
I'm sorry. I wasn't aware that we were supposed to be memorizing the entire song. That wasn't in my homework
Here,
assignment.
I got it right. As far as the hasty pudding, it goes. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Gooding, and there we saw the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding.
Yeah, as thick as hasty pudding.
We're not smart people, if you know what I mean.
And to the same extent, whenever it comes to music, something that I noticed, especially in the past few years, was that a particular song from the game Far Cry 5 has been used as a song of pride. Ubisoft made the game Far Cry 5 back in 2017, and they put a song in there called Keep Your Rifle by Your Side, and I personally use it for a lot of my videos.
Well, the thing is the song is unironically a banger, and it's one of those things where, like, all of Far Cry 5 is partially a parody and partially a, like, homage to, like, rural America. And it's kind of the same with that song, I think, where it's kind of supposed to be a caricature, but it's also like, no, this is how people feel.
Right, and Ubisoft, they tried to mock a lot of right-wing people, and they did an absolutely terrible job whenever it came to making us seem like the bad guys. It was down to the point that, like, GameSpot, a popular YouTube channel, did a meet and greet with the makers of the game, and they were absolutely confused whenever they were playing the game. They were talking about how there's a specific character in the game. He's running for Senate, I believe. Yes, Herc Senior. So yeah, like Herc Senior, like right when you first meet him, he's like talking about like these libtards up in Washington, and they were so confused because they were like, well, he's supposed to be a good guy. Like, why is he talking bad about Obama and all that? And I think that's absolutely hilarious that they can't imagine that there's a lot of right-wing people who are not some crazy gun-wielding cultists.
The thing is about Far Cry 5 and maybe some other stories like it, but there's a lot more nuance to it that people don't realize, and maybe Ubisoft didn't even intend, because like at surface value it might seem like the project at Eden's Gate, the cult within the game, is like this criticism of ultra conservative, whatever, gun-toting, whatever people. But at the same time, it's like most of the other people in the game, most of the good guys, are also redneck, conservative gun-toting people. And so it's weird because the game is critical of those people in some times and some parts, and then on the flip side, it shows them in a good light as well.
Right, and they were absolutely confused about that, GameSpot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, they almost, they're trying to, like, it seems like they're trying to strike a balance a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's times when, I think in general, most of the Seed family, I think it's pretty obvious that they're pretty messed up. They have some pretty weird intentions for people. But then Joseph Seed comes along and he's like, hey, no, we're trying to accept these people. We're trying to save them. And in his own twisted way, you see him kind of offering that olive branch of like, hey, I'm just trying to do the right thing here. I think the world's going to end. At the same time, the people in Hope County, I think they're definitely a reflection of, how a lot of people in the conservative community feel. And that's kind of dialed up to 10 by the game developers. I don't think a lot of them were, people like us. So you get this kind of parody of both almost at this, because of it.
Yeah, well, a big chunk of Ubisoft are French. They're based out of Canada, somewhere in Quebec, I think. But yeah, that's kind of what I was touching on, because while the game is definitely exaggerated and over the top in a lot of ways, like I said, there's still a lot of very patriotic stuff, very pro-gun stuff, and it does obviously take a lot of jabs at conservatives and country folks. I mean, Herc Jr. and Sr. are both a big caricature of, that sort of Larry the Cable Guy, podunk dude. There's the whole, Clutch Nixon, Ultra America, like guns and eagles and fireworks and all that. But, it portrays positive images of those communities of common everyman, using their rights, joining together. But also on the flip side, you have like the Project of Eden's Gate and Joseph Seed, and they're not necessarily based or red pilled or anything like that, because I mean there's even parts in the game where Joseph Seed himself like criticizes conservative policies and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's maybe where Ubisoft succeeded, is they wanted to have a little bit more nuance, and it sparks conversations. They wanted people to be able to sympathize with both sides to some degree and say, well, maybe they're not always wrong, maybe they're not always right. Because the cult itself isn't necessarily always portrayed as being in the wrong, and even in Far Cry New Dawn, the sort of unofficial non-canon sequel that they made, where Joseph Seed's still alive, he's kind of redeemed himself and come to realize, hey, maybe I didn't have it all correct, maybe I was wrong on some things. And when the game came out, when Far Cry 5 came out, I should say, not New Dawn, when Far Cry 5 came out, a lot of people still had a problem, and we were talking about that just a second ago, but people were like, oh, it's not good that there are good characters that are crazy conservative gun-toting people, and the cult is like not so much. Like, because that was at the height of the Donald Trump craze, and everyone was all about conservatives versus liberals, and red-blooded Americans are bad and we should ridicule them. And
But yeah, you're 100% correct on all those things, and I'd like to take it back just a second, like talking about Eden's Gate in particular. Uh, Whenever they were making the game, it seemed like they wanted to make them seem like the bad guys, but their actions really show that they're not all that bad. Like, especially with Faith. Faith, the entire time, she's like talking to you, and she's like, I don't want to hurt people. Like, here you are killing a bunch of people, and I'm still trying to forgive you. And same thing with John. He was like, your sin is wrath. Like, sure, we're bad guys, but at the same time, here you are murdering hundreds of people, and you don't feel bad about it whatsoever. And every single step of the way, they're still trying to redeem you. So whenever it came to like trying to make them seem like a bad guy, they did absolutely a poor job. And spoiler alert for the game, but at the end, Joseph Seed was kind of right with the nukes going off. So
yeah, and that's where like a lot of that nuance comes through, and that's where you have to be really careful when you're analyzing characters like the Seeds, or even real life people like Ted Kaczynski or David Koresh, because like if you look at their ideology, if you look at their beliefs, you're like, man, they were right about some things. They were maybe onto something. They maybe had a point. But, just because they were maybe right doesn't necessarily mean that what they how they went about those things was correct. And that's not to say that, in Far Cry 5 you're justified in slaughtering half of a county, or the ATF was justified in burning down the Waco temple. It's very hard to have everything be completely right or completely wrong, especially when it's something as complicated as differing beliefs, different rights or opinions. And it's really hard when you get into cultic type of stuff, because a lot of these people think that they're like the absolute right. They're objectively morally correct in what they're doing.
right.
Well, I think with a lot of those symbols, like looking at like Uncle Ted or the Branch Davidians, people take those things that are relatable, that they can see themselves in, and they kind of latch onto that and kind of ignore a lot of the negative per se. Just because it just makes for such a good symbol for them to kind of go, oh, I'm the dude in the hoodie and the aviator glasses. I'm that guy. I'm literally him.
Yeah,
When at the same time, he was.
we probably shouldn't
And
make those people our heroes.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
especially
But
like Ted Kaczynski. If you look into his life, he was always crazy. He was always looking for a reason to kill somebody.
Yeah,
He was not a good person. And his writing, it just seemed more of like a scapegoat.
yeah, and a lot of times with these kinds of people, with Ted Kaczynski, with David Koresh, with Jim Jones, even it wasn't that they thought that society was broken and they had the solution. It was society is awful and evil, and it either needs to be destroyed or we need to exclude ourselves from it.
I think those guys are another symbol that, not necessarily those guys per se, but that kind of overarching thing. Guys that are kind of considered maybe an anti-hero
Mm.
of people that are cautious about society. Guys like Marvin Heemeyer, for instance, Killdozer. Bevo Russell, who stole that Q400 in Seattle a couple years ago.
Is it Sky
Those
King?
people that kind of lashed out against yeah, Sky King, exactly. Those people that kind of lashed out against society, whether it be for just because they want to feel alive in the case of Bebo, or people that truly thought society was broken and in their own way they wanted to fix it. That kind of culture, I kind of call it the tinfoil hat culture a little bit. That culture has definitely been something that people in a lot of circles have accepted. I mean, you look at Alex Jones, like he was kind of a big deal around 2001, and then he kind of went totally schizo, and everyone's like, oh, he's crazy. And then like a lot of the
Talking about the
symbols
frog
started
guy.
talking.
Yeah, the gay frogs guy. Well, I actually have a
Turn him the
conspiracy
freaking frogs
behind that.
gay.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah.
We can maybe get into that deeper a little bit more, but part of the reason that he went crazy right around then. Do you guys know the story with him?
I know that he
actually.
went to what was that meeting up in the woods?
Yeah,
Cultist stuff.
he tried to expose that secret society camp in Northern California, and it was around I think it was like early 2000s. And right after he started to try to expose it, that's when everyone was like, "Oh, this dude's crazy. This dude's nuts," to like discredit him. But we can get into that another time. That's a whole nother thing.
Well, I was going to say those figures have definitely become something that we have, as a community, have kind of embraced, if anything, and we've been like, hey, they might be right sometimes. It's definitely something I didn't see until, you know, I think the Trump administration was kind of a turning point for that kind of thing when people kind of were like, hey, let's look at these alternative news sources that the mainstream media doesn't really acknowledge, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, some of these guys might be kind of right about some stuff. Let's listen to them, and it kind of went from there.
Right, we're definitely in the middle of a big political shift, especially if you look around the world, not just in the United States. Down in Argentina, Milei, he was the first third-party candidate that won, and first self-proclaimed libertarian that won presidential elections. So whenever we look at different outsources, you can see that there's a big change starting.
I definitely see a lot of people, especially in like the like, not to get too into politics right now, but looking at like the pre-primary polls that have been coming out, there's a lot of people that have really started looking at conservatism in the Republican Party and going, you know what, as a reflection of the last 3 or 4 years, 4 years once the election happens, this might be the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like, my mom's a good example. She was someone that she was very outspoken. She didn't like Trump. She'd been a Democrat voter for as long as I can remember, but I think she's kind of realizing, coupled with the economic implications of what's happening, you're seeing these people kind of coming to that side because they're just. I think a big part of it, in my mom's case especially, is that she's just afraid of war happening, and I think she recognizes that the Republican Party, if not Donald Trump, they're a lot more apt to prevent war from happening. I mean, I've never seen a sitting president walk across the Korean border before,
Yeah.
or the North Korean border, until Trump was president, right? So I think we're going to be definitely seeing a shift towards that kind of conservatism in people that we haven't really seen before. It's been really interesting to see, for sure.
Fear is a great motivator because Yeah, nothing gets your attention like wondering if something bad's going to happen. And I, having worked in a sporting goods store during the height of COVID, everybody was buying guns, was stocking up on this or that. I mean, even in various cults, Branch Davidians, Project at Eden's Gate, like all these different cults, fear is a big motivator in those too, not just in keeping people there, but attracting people, because it's that question of what if he's right, what if the world is going to end, what if this or that is going to happen, and these people claim to have the solution or have an idea of what it all means or how to make some sense of it. And that's attractive. People hate being afraid. They want someone to solve their problems. And there's also a bit of that. People are attracted to an underdog story or a martyr. It's endearing to see people rise above or fight against something.
And that's one of the reasons that RFK Jr. is leading the polls in some states. Uh, he's an outsider to many, and he was trying to run for the Democratic nominee, but he left that because of everything that was going down. And a lot of people are still attaching him because he's talking about trying to end the Fed and the CIA, the ATF, and all that.
Yeah, I definitely I think there's a lot of people that have really embraced that just classically American notion of tearing down those supposedly, I'm not gonna be inflammatory or anything, wink wink, but tearing down those negative institutions and instead kind of making things more right for the people. That was going back into the Revolutionary War. And I think back then there was a lot more of a there was a lot more of like an academic basis for a lot of that. There was a lot of philosophers that people would reference, like a lot of the flags that were used. Those there was references to philosophers and imagery there. Whereas now, I think it's coming more so from just a simple red-blooded American fervor. We're seeing a lot of extremely, I kind of call it truck stop Americana, but like you see these really extremely American images, like Donald Trump dressed up as Rambo on flags. I remember that flag. I saw it in the January 6th video. That's a whole nother topic altogether we won't delve into, but like I remember seeing flags like that in January 6th, and like you look around and there's like the pictures of Reagan riding velociraptors and stuff. And those images were things that I think for a time, at least especially towards the end of the Obama administration and into the Trump administration, that kind of sense, and you see this in Far Cry 5 a little bit, that sense of extreme Americanism, the bald eagle flying in front of a torn American flag and fireworks, right? I think that was kind of seen as some sort of, infantile, sense of Americanism for a while. But I mean, I think since the Biden administration came into play, people have kind of taken those images and been like, no, that's us, man. It kind of goes back to where those images came from, like in the kind of the post 9/11 world when things became super American. We had freedom fries and George W. Bush was landing on aircraft carriers, to give speeches, right? Like, that hadn't been seen before 2001, and then it's really come back now that people are really starting to get a sense of, if not rebelliousness, just a sense of like, we're Americans and we want to be proud of it instead of being ashamed of it, as opposed to how I
well,
think
it's definitely the first time that we've seen it in our lifetime. If you go back into history, there's always been points in time where America has been extremely patriotic, like especially in World War I and World War II. They changed the name of hamburgers to like Liberty Burgers. So it's more just a resurgence of Americana.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it definitely had a different face back then too. It was a lot more. I think it was a lot more rooted in classical American values rather than kind of a machismo that's kind of been produced since then. I mean, Look at if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy. Look at President Lincoln Camacho. If you, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but he's played by Terry Crews, and he has like this American flag vest, and he walks into Congress with a mini me, machine gun, right? And everyone's like, "Oh, this guy rules." And you wouldn't have seen people like that. I think back to like the bicentennial in the '70s. There was like like Ray Charles was singing "America the Beautiful" and stuff, and it was very grounded. And now it's kind of gotten to the point where people kind of need that kind of sense of like ultra machoism to identify with it. Whether or not that's positive, I'm not sure. I think it's kind of cool sometimes, in little doses, but it's definitely, it has a distinctly modern flavor that wouldn't have happened had things not gotten so polarized. I don't think.
Hmm.
I
And
think
that's exactly why in 2024 I'm voting for Reagan and Raptor.
Reagan and Raptor 24. Well, I think what you're saying there goes back to that bigger concept of just the symbology and how people
Mm.
people love a symbol to rally behind, a person to hold up as their ideal, and it's also one of those things where if you mock me about something so much, or if you say something about me so much, then eventually I'll embrace it. And that's not just with,
Right.
with all this political stuff, but you know, if someone is thinking something about you or saying something about you all the time, then eventually, a lot of people will just be like, okay, fine, if that's what you want me to be, if that's what you think of me, then I will deliver. I'll be that, and I'll show you that that's a good thing, and that I can use that to my benefit, to my advantage, almost as a way to like stick it to them.
Yeah, and with that in mind, like in 2016, Hillary Clinton, she referred to Trump supporters as a basket of deplorables, and Trump, after that comment, at his rallies, he would play the song "Do You Hear the People Sing" from the musical Les Morels. How do you pronounce that? That
Les
French
Miserables.
play.
Les Miserables.
Yeah,
It's French.
Les
I'm not French,
They use way too many
but
S's.
but yeah, he would play that song and with a graphic that was titled "Les Deplorables."
Yeah.
And to the same vein, during the last presidential debate, Trump called Hillary a nasty woman, and Hillary then sold merch with a phrase for her campaign. All those funds would go to the campaign.
That's right. I forgot about the nasty woman thing.
Clever girl. That was
Yeah, like that
a
comment
big deal.
became then a
No, it was a big
silence.
deal. What's that? We're still figuring out the whole rhythm, the circadian rhythm of the podcast. We'll get there, I promise. Um, no, I remember I had a friend that was a Hillary supporter, and she was like all about the nasty woman thing. She was like, "Yeah, that's me." Ugh. Like it was like her whole personality going into that election, and then I remember I was with her the night of the election. We were watching on TV, and oh man, when Trump won, and granted that from a purely libertarian standpoint, which I think a lot of us are, if not we're close to, things were not perfectly peachy throughout that whole administration. I'm not going to be one to just totally worship Trump, but
Mhm.
at the same time, I mean, there was a sense of utter doom from that camp. That if Trump won, people were going to move to Canada, and we were going to be burning in 4 years. And in reality, I mean, things weren't perfect, but
We did all right.
bump stock ban. But we did fine. I mean, the economy was pretty good. I will. I'm a pretty staunch libertarian to almost a candy Democrat, but I will always remember the moment I saw a standing president walk across the North Korean border. That will be something I will tell my kids about.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people forget about that that administration quite a bit is their foreign policy served America. at the end of the day. And that American first mindset, that became a really big rallying cry. That was something that it was almost it was parodied actually in if you look at Starship Troopers, that was kind of parodied in that movie. You know, humanity first. And there was that kind of ultra macho nationalist kind of parody going on in that movie. And people have since kind of accepted that and gone, yeah, that's kind of what needs to happen sometimes is putting your country before all else and portraying that sense of strength, for better or worse. But yeah, no, it's been a very interesting thing to see.
Hmm.
I think because there's nothing as much of a caricature or a joke or a mockery of as that stuff might be, at its core, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, it's no one can really say it is bad to take pride in your country or your culture or your nationality and still acknowledge, hey, there are problems with it. Hey, there are things that we've done that were wrong. We've made mistakes, but ultimately there is something to be proud of in this. And we can, the whole kind of idea of Americana, American culture, is that despite hardships, despite things that we may come from or bad things that might have happened in our past, we can still endure and look forward to something being better and take pride in knowing that we all at least should be working towards one common goal of, being united, helping each other, lifting each other up, defending ourselves and each other from any harm, from any attack, and ultimately working towards a goal of, unity, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I mean, that's really what it all boils down to, obviously.
I think in the long run, those symbols. You good over there?
Yeah, my phone dropped.
It sounded like he thought he hit his head on the desk.
Like one came out
I died
or something. I think over time, I think this next election is going to be really important to that, and it's going to really depend on who's the nominees that end up running. But I think over time, some of these things that are like if you look at the political spectrum of where we are right now, from a purely like historical standpoint, everything has shifted pretty far, to the right a little bit. I mean, like your Democrat of now is not the same Democrat as they were, back in the day. They've become very polarized.
Everything's become much more of an
if you're not a
extreme.
Democrat and yeah, and if you're not an extreme left-leaning Democrat, I mean, the Libertarians and the Republicans are kind of in the center, the center right. I mean, the Republicans they're not so far removed from the more liberal party they were back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
The point I'm trying to make, though, is I think depending on how this election goes, I think we might see a really big resurgence in unity, and I see people like it's kind of how I've seen Christianity being kind of reaccepted by people. There's been a lot of people coming back to the church, especially people that are of a lesser like traditional Christian background. Like I've seen on TikTok, there's actually like old porn stars that have came back to the church, and they're very open about their journey, and they're really proud that they're kind of re-finding their faith. In a similar vein, I think there's going to be a lot of people kind of coming back to that kind of center right where things were, at least, looking back into the 20th century. I mean, elections used to go either way, and it was always about who the candidate was, because people were kind of in the middle instead of polarized. And I like to think I see that happening. Maybe it won't happen. But I think some of these imageries and some of these things that make us more proud to be American are going to be contributing to that. At least I hope so.
I see the complete opposite online, that there's more of a divide than there has ever been. It seems as though that nobody can really speak to one another civilly. I was on a live a few weeks ago where this woman was putting flags up on the screen saying that these were signs of hate. And I tried coming on there to say, like, yeah, a lot of these flags are being used for hate, but we should be able to distinguish those who's using them for hate and those of us who are trying to use them for good and their intended purposes. Flags like the Gadsden flag and like the flag of the country Georgia and the United States Marine Corps flag. A lot of these flags we hold dear to us, and we shouldn't let them be used for symbols of hate. And I was, absolutely viciously attacked. Like they could not understand that someone like myself wants to use them for good, and especially like she went on a tangent about Pepe the Frog. Like she was saying that Pepe the Frog was a big right-wing conservative symbol, and I tried to explain to her like, no, it was actually a comic strip, and in foreign countries it's still being used for good. Like in the Hong Kong protest, it was a sign of freedom.
Yeah.
And that's why I used it myself, is because one, I liked the meme whenever it came out and it was popular, and it's also been used as a symbol for good.
Well, I think you bring up a interesting point there of making the distinction of, are these things bad or are they being used for something bad? Because, and it goes back to the whole Yankee Doodle song. Like, things can be adapted by certain people for a certain meaning that was never the original intent or point of what they came from. And like you're saying, just because some people are using something in a bad way doesn't mean that entire thing is bad. And we should be able to look at those things, look at those people, and be like, hey, even though these people, this group is using things or saying things or doing things that are bad, that's not necessarily representative of all the people or all of the things involved in that, or that they are taking that from, is probably a more better way to say it. Like, going back to cults, I know I keep going back to the cults, but like, just because David Koresh or Project Eden's Gate, just because they had some stuff that was based in biblical belief, that doesn't mean that all Christians are a bunch of crazy doomsday kooks, even though a lot probably are. But it's...
And I have to say, like, probably the most famous symbol that has ever been used as a symbol of hate was the swastika.
Yeah.
It was a Hindu symbol that was used for, yeah, peace and love and all that. And now you can't even have that in your home if you're a Hindu, or else you're going to be facing discrimination.
Well, that was actually a really big controversy with Far Cry 4, because it's set in a Himalayan kind of Nepal like country, and that sort of imagery is very big there. And I'm not remembering if there's actually any swastikas in the game, but I think that might have been the problem, is that they had all these...
Yeah, I don't think there was.
Yeah, I think that was like part of the controversy, is they had all these Eastern mysticism, temples and symbology and talks and people, but like they were too afraid to actually include that because of what it meant, in Western culture.
Well, so I think that brings up a point that I was gonna make. I think the swastika is a perfect example of this, and I'm the last person to defend Nazism. I hate Nazis. I love the movie Inglourious Bastards, right? Like I want to be Aldo Rain, but I think until look back in history and like the Olympics that was hosted in Berlin. I mean, the swastika banner was everywhere, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is the symbol of this German party that they're." At the time, people didn't realize what they kind of mostly stood for, but they were like, "Oh, this is going on. This is happening." And I think until a symbol is used for nefarious purposes or used by a group for those reasons, it shouldn't be considered bad. And I think we've kind of reflected on that. But there's plenty of imagery, like people like the FBI list that came out about flags imagery, right? I have 2 of those in my office right now. I have 2 Revolutionary War flags. I have the Serapis flag and
Whoa.
I just
Whoa.
Let's go. Let's roll it back a couple
Freudian slip.
seconds.
Let's cut that. Let me say that. Yeah, you look at that FBI list of imagery. I have 2 of those in my office. I have the Serapis flag and I have the Benedictine flag in my office.
Yeah, when that
does that make me? And I also what's that?
I was gonna say, when that FBI list came out, I thought it was like a bingo chart.
Yeah, well, kind of a little bit. I mean, I even have a nationalist Chinese flag that's from the 1940s hanging in here. Does that make me, as it is? It just depends on the context that it's used in.
Yeah.
People take some of those flags that were flown on January 6th and they go, oh, these, the people that have the Culpeper Minuteman flag, and these other things, they're bad people. Now, I'm not going to defend the Stars and Bars. That was there. And I don't like Confederates, but those other symbols, I mean, a lot of those people were just there, there was some stuff going on for sure. And that's discourse for another day, but at the end of the day, a lot of those symbols were just adjacent. They weren't actively, causing harm, but people think they're on the same level of waving a swastika or the Stars and Bars, but it's just really not that case.
Mm. Well, I think there has to be some humility and self-awareness when you're talking about this kind of stuff, because, and this, you see this from both sides, but we can very easily fall into the trap of criticizing other people for things that we do ourselves, or vice versa. They will criticize us about things that they do themselves. And the example that's coming to mind, I know it's a bit extreme, is going back to the whole Killdozer story of, oh, here was this guy who was upset with society, who was upset with how he had been done wrong, and while his grievances were legitimate, his frustration was justified. I think we can all agree that getting in a bulldozer and flattening half of the town is probably not a good idea for a lot of reasons. But at the same time, a lot of people kind of say, oh, the decent man driven to do an undecent thing, and to some degree it's like you can kind of understand him and we kind of make excuses for him, but then at the same time we'll look at Antifa or BLM who riot and burn down an entire city and say, oh, that was bad. Just because they were upset doesn't mean that it was okay. And not to say that, it's two-faced, but it can be very easy to accidentally fall into hypocrisy when talking about that kind of stuff. And as far as the symbology, I can't really think of any time where something that's more like conservative or libertarian has been bastardized by the left or whatever you want to call it. But
well, I mean, look at the Gadsden flag. That was a flag that was made by Benjamin Franklin and Gadsden back in the era of the Revolutionary War. It was initially used as a symbol of colonial Marines, not from Halo, but from New England, and they took that symbol of the rattlesnake, and they put it on a flag, and they went from there.
Mm.
And then fast forward to a few years ago, I mean, the left kind of took that flag. They looked into Benjamin Franklin is a really interesting character. I think we're going to talk about him eventually. He doesn't have a lot of things that are traditionally red flags for liberals. He didn't own slaves. He was just kind of this aloof inventor that just went to France and
he was very sex positive.
Partied. Yes, to say the least. But they looked at Gadsden and they go, "Oh, this guy was a slave owner. Therefore, that flag is promoting those things."
Yeah.
And you saw and I think it's still happening in some degree, But you saw people, there. I remember there was a guy. I think he was like a UPS driver, or maybe he was a grounds crewman. I can't remember, at an airport. But he lost his job because he wore a Gadsden flag to work every day, and I remember him getting interviewed. I'll have to find the article and post it to our Discord, but I remember him getting interviewed, and he was like, "Yeah, the person that reported me, he saw me every day. I was good friends with him, but because of the hat I wore, you know, he just didn't like it, I guess." The kicker is the guy was black. It wasn't like some big beefy, neo-Nazi looking dude. This was a black man that just believed in that symbol, and it was at its core a symbol of unity in the American colonies, and since has taken a different meaning with some people. And you wonder what the next symbol is going to be that's taken like that. You know what I mean?
And that's really one of the saddest parts about it is a lot of this stuff feels pretty sudden. It's like, in the past we all knew, oh, this is a historical symbol, there was this historical significance. And to some degree, everyone kind of just kept quiet about the whole slavery thing because we all, inherently, subconsciously agree it was bad. So it feels like, 10 years ago we were able to overlook that and say, hey, we know that was bad, we knew that was wrong, but there was still some good things going on at the time. Just because a bad thing was happening doesn't mean, just because there was one bad apple doesn't mean the entire basket was corrupted. And then nowadays you see that, oh, if we can find one little thing, if we can expose one little chink in the armor, if we can discover one thing to criticize, then the entire thing is suddenly invalidated. And that's not fair, because one, nobody's perfect. Nobody does everything always right all the time. And just because someone may have made a mistake or done something wrong doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything is bad and we should never, listen to them or have any value in what they say or what they do.
Whenever we look at the people in the past, like Benjamin Franklin or like Washington, a lot of people like to think of them as revolutionaries, and then there's other people who only see them for slave owners. So we need to remember that one day our symbols can be used for evil, or things that we support now is going to be looked at in the future as deplorable.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're tearing down a Thomas Jefferson statue. Um, I think it was in the New York City Hall. This happened this week. They took down the statue because he was very famously, a large slave owner on a plantation in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back to when there was, Confederate statues being taken down, rightfully so. I mean, come on. I think that's a pretty. Some people will disagree with me. That being said, a lot of those were put up in the 20th century, not right after the Civil War. But when those were being taken down, I remember Trump said, look, they're going to come for, statues of Washington and Jefferson and, these former founding fathers next, because, either they don't like what they said, they don't like that they supported slavery. Once again, not saying that that's right, but at the end of the day, here we are, and statues of Jefferson are being taken down, and George Washington's legacy has greatly been called into question because he was a slave owner. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be something we're going to see compounding with a lot of different historical figures. I wonder if there's ever going to be a point where they go, oh, Abraham Lincoln, he only was against slavery because, it helped his political gains or something like that. Like, I just see that happening just because of the road we've been down so far.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying of how there's no value in those people or those ideas because there was something bad in it. And we can all agree that those things were not good. We can all agree now with our modern mindset, with our modern understanding of things, that slavery is bad. And also, you have to remember, a lot of people back then thought that too. But it was largely a product of the culture and of the times, and so you hear people say, "Oh, if I lived back then, I would have, X, Y, and Z," and it's like you can't necessarily say that for sure, because you're saying that with your modern lens, with your modern interpretation, your modern ideas that have come because of how things used to be back then. And if you were in those times, you would have been a lot more like that. And I think that's what people forget a lot of times is we have to be allowed to make mistakes. We have to be allowed to learn from things and be able to look back and recognize, hey, this thing that we did, this thing that we used to think, this way that we acted was wrong, and we have now learned from it and found a better way to do things.
Mm-hmm. This just in, according to Brandybuck, slavery is wrong.
I know, who would have known? And, to go even deeper, and I'm going to maybe get a little theological here, but you see a lot of that with biblical stuff, even, of, cults or ideologies. Slavery was heavily defended with the Bible because there are some passages, if taken in the incorrect context, let me reiterate on that a lot of stuff in the Bible that is abused and misused is often very, very out of context, especially verses about slavery. That's a whole other conversation we won't have today. But you have to be really careful, because if people want to make a point and they want to back up a point, unfortunately, they will not get things to, they will not look for ways to disprove themselves. They will look for ways to make things back them up. And that's what a lot of people do with all kinds of things, but people do it a lot with the Bible. In cults, with slavery, they would say, oh, here's this section, here's this verse, here's this Bible story, or this thing that Jesus said, so that must mean that what I want to be true is true.
Right.
And it's a really, really dangerous game to play.
Well, it's easy to play judge, jury, and executioner with hindsight being 2020, especially with generally someone's opinions being favorable. The I don't see a lot of Republicans going, oh, these statues of Lee, they should be kept up because, the Confederates were fighting. You don't see that happening because people are like, dude, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. But, these other people are like, hey, Jefferson had slaves. Why is this statue in the New York council chambers? I posted that article on our Discord and our sources tab. Why is he here? And people are like, oh yeah, slavery bad, and they just take that turn without really asking questions about it. I didn't see any discourse about that at all when it was done. In fact, it was done pretty quietly. I was pretty lucky to see an article about it, and there was very few that were written.
Well, I think that's another danger of addressing that kind of stuff, is trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend that it never happened. Obviously we shouldn't look back fondly on those things, but we shouldn't completely forget them either. Because if we ignore and deny and, try to poo-poo all of the things that were bad in our past, then there's never really any growth. There's never any improvement or things to learn from, because you want to act like it never happened or like it never existed.
I think a lot of this does come from a place of, reflecting on the past and moving forward. These symbols come from somewhere. and especially with some of the Revolutionary War imagery, some of the flags that we have in our houses, or the things that we put on our cars, that's all done in the spirit of remembering what happened and honoring those people that came before.
Hmm.
Whether that be the people that fought for our independence, or the military, or even the crazy tinfoil hat people that drove bulldozers and flew planes. Right? We all have those things that mean things to us. My question for you guys, this we'll kind of start wrapping this up. We've been talking for about an hour now. What symbols are your favorites to kind of be represented by, or fly per se?
Well, I am personally a really big fan of the Gadsden flag, the "Don't tread on me" and the snake. Sorry, Memester, if I stole your choice, but
You done?
no, I mean I have the flag flying over my garage. I've got a coffee tumbler, in the yellow with the snake, and I like obviously the look of it, but the message behind it of not only oh, don't mess with me, but I see a little bit more depth to it. It's kind of that idea of do no harm but take no crap. And
Hmm.
I mean, there's even a Bible verse. It's one of my favorite Bible verses of, as as much as it depends on you, be at peace with everybody. So it's like you don't, and it's kind of a contradictory to the come and take it symbol in a way, because one is saying, hey, I'm ready for a fight, come see what's going to happen, and then the other is, hey, I don't want any trouble, but if you are going to start something, I'm going to bite back.
Right.
And that's kind of the mentality I think that is best to take of, I don't want to go out looking for a fight. I want everyone to get along. I want there to be peace in the land and peace between people. But if something happens that threatens that, then I'm going to go to work and do business.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of that. I mean, I've got "Don't Tread on Me" tattooed on my arm, but instead of copying what you were going to say, I'll say that probably my favorite symbol or message would definitely have to be the Waco siege. Seeing what happened there, it makes you think about what could happen in the future.
Mm.
And especially, seeing that building on fire makes you remember that although we elect these people into office, they're still uh, susceptible to doing wrong.
Mm. It's like Wendigoon says, if you ever think to yourself, the government would never do that, yeah, they would.
Oh, yes, they would.
Or like Reagan said, one of the worst things you can hear, one of the most dangerous things someone can say is, we're from the government and we're here to help.
Ironic coming from the man that created
Yeah,
Reaganomics, but
we won't really get into that one, but a broken clock is right
and the
twice a
assault
day.
weapons ban. Yeah. One that I've recently become really uh, a really big fan of. I've always kind of gravitated towards like colonial naval history. I have the Serapis flag of John Paul Jones fame hanging over my desk. But the flag that I've really gravitated towards is the Washington's Cruisers flag. If you don't know what that is, it's the flag it's a white flag with a pine tree on it. And it says "An Appeal to Heaven" on the top of the flag. It was initially designed by Joseph Reed, Colonel Joseph Reed. It was Washington's secretary, um, and it was commissioned by George Washington to fly on a fleet of cruisers that Washington had built for the colonial navy, to defend the shores of the colonies. The symbology is really cool. The pine tree itself was a symbol of New England, um, for centuries. It was used by the Iroquois, um, on their kind of national flag. It's called the Hiawatha Belt. And it comes from the 5 tribes of that area burying their weapons under that pine tree in the pursuit of peace. So there's always kind of that hope for peace. And then the terminology and appeal to heaven comes from John Locke in chapter 14 in the second treatise on civil government. I'm reading this. I don't remember this all. I just want to get you guys the right information. Basically, he says, and here the body of people or any single man is deprived of their right or is under the exercise of a power without right and have no appeal on earth, then they have a liberty to appeal to heaven whenever they judge the cause of sufficient moment. So basically, justifying that if things are bad enough for you or your people on earth, appeal to God and appeal to the rights of man that, you should have those rights and you should be able to have a say in your determination. I've really liked that flag. I have it on my car. I have a hat with a patch on it. It's just I like the symbology behind it. I like what it means. It looks pretty good on gear too, but that's been one I've been really into lately.
What you were just saying about the whole appeal to heaven with John Locke, that reminds me of another document that was pretty influential during the Revolution, and it's called A Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants. And it's a very similar to the whole idea of what John Locke was saying of, if you have an authority who is acting unjustly, then that authority does not deserve to be followed. And so you are, like John Locke was saying, you are free to appeal to heaven. Anyway, I'm basically saying what you're saying all over again. I don't know why.
Well, it's definitely a well-founded and established idea, and it gives province to, people. There's only at some point, whether or not this is a reflection of what's going on or not, I will leave that up to ambiguity. But at some point, there's only so much you can do before things have to be taken into one's hands. And the fact that these political philosophers and these founding fathers reflected on that as early as the 18th century, I think that's really important, and that's something that should be remembered by more people than there has been. Well, guys, I think that about wraps it up. I thank you two gentlemen so much for joining us this morning to talk about what we've talked about. That being said, where can you find you guys on social media? I know we're all pretty active on there.
Yeah, all of us are online. We are not all everywhere, but we are all somewhere. So I am on YouTube and TikTok at Darth Brandybuck. You can find me there.
And you can find me over on YouTube and TikTok as the Political Memester.
And then I'm over on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the Tac Racc. One word, THETACRACC. Well, guys, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for listening to the very first TIR News podcast. We're going to be covering a variety of topics in the vein of liberty, from history all the way up to guns and gear. And our next episode will be a reflection of that. We sincerely hope you tune in next week to join us for that, from the free world to wherever you are. Thank you so much for listening to TAR News USA.